I was on summer break and went camping with my friend and his parents. We went to the lake during the day and did the s'mores thing at night. His parents shared a tent while my friend and I had our own. I can't remember where the campsite was, and I'm not really in contact with my friend anymore. But 15 years later, I'm assuming it wasn't the safest place to camp. Here's why. I woke up sometime in the early morning, like 3 or 4 a.m., and immediately saw a man's face looking in the tent at us. He had unzipped the door just enough to stick his head inside. He looked absolutely insane. He had big eyes and wild hair. I was so stiff from fear, I literally couldn't do anything. The man kept moving his head from left to right, very, very slowly, as if it was uncontrollable. I guess my friend could hear me breathing loudly or something, because he woke up too. He had the same reaction as me, and just laid there in terror, looking at this mysterious man. I'm not certain how long he was sitting there looking at us, but it felt like hours, shaking his head back and forth. At some point, we heard a noise close by, and so did the man. He disappeared quick, and a couple minutes later we got out of our tent and woke up his parents. The guy was long gone. I'm still afraid of camping to this day.
I am in my mid-40s. This is what happened nearly 20 years ago. One day I visited one of my friends at his apartment, which was very old and shabby. There was an entrance to an elevator in the center of the corridor. I can't remember well, but my friend lived in unit 701 or 801 on the 7th or 8th floor. So looking at the apartment building from outside the main entrance, his house was on the far left end. One summer day, my friend said he was alone and didn't have any plans, so we called 2 of our friends and had a drinking party. The 4 of us had been drinking since the early evening, and just before passing out, we all lied on the floor, turned the lights off, and started talking. While talking to each other, a beam of street light entered through the window and was shining on the ceiling. I guess the street lights on the first floor of the apartment complex were on. Of course, we were talking while gazing at the ceiling. All of a sudden, the white ceiling turned black, as if something covered up the light. At that moment, we looked out the window while crouching down. Someone with a creepy vibe was hanging on a steel bar outside the window. Since the light was shining from behind that person, we could not see his face clearly. Then, after making an unidentifiable gesture, he smiled, showing his white teeth without making a sound. We were so shocked at that moment that we stopped talking and were frozen with silence. Suddenly, one of us picked up an empty bottle of wine and ran toward the window shouting, "Kill that bastard!" But the creepy guy had disappeared. After a few minutes, we went out of the apartment to see where he had gone, but we could not find him. We could only hear his stomping footsteps and assumed he entered the corridor and went down the stairs. Going down the stairs is the only way that stomping sound could be made. It sounded like he descended to the first floor and was walking around, so we followed down the stairs looking for him, but quickly returned to the apartment, still filled with fear. At first, we thought it must have been a robber or some crazy guy laughing in front of the window. But when we came back to our friend's house, we were all shocked. The distance between the end of the corridor and the window of our friend's apartment was too long for someone hanging onto the steel window bar to jump across. Only a crazy person would try and fall to their death. Ordinary people can't even hold on to the steel bar. We thought that maybe someone had committed suicide by jumping from the roof of the apartment and caught the steel bar while falling. So we went down to the first floor to see if a body was there, but there wasn't a single trace. After that experience, I never visited his house again.
A few years ago, I was driving from Texas to Louisiana to help my dad move when I stopped at this tiny, crappy motel right off the highway. It was very late at night, and it was the only option I could see. I don't remember the person who checked me in at all. I was so drowsy I could barely keep my eyes open. All I remember is sitting on the bed, kicking off my boots, and noticing that my room was connected to another room. I saw that the lock on that door was turned to the right, which looked like the locked position to me, and I fell backwards and passed out on the bed. At some point I turned my body and laid on the bed fully. I don't remember when or how long I had been sleeping. Then I was awoken in the most terrifying way imaginable. A sharp object was stabbed into my back. I screamed and rolled off the bed. I looked and just barely caught a glimpse of what looked like a very skinny man with long, greasy hair run through the door that connected our rooms. I was taken to the hospital after I ran into the parking lot screaming, and the paramedic removed a letter opener from my back. I never returned to the motel, and I have no idea what happened or who it was.
When I was a little girl, my parents took me to visit my grandmother. She lived in a little village in the countryside. Her cottage was very small and there was only one bedroom. My grandmother slept in one bed. My parents slept in the other, and I had to sleep on some cushions on the floor. We stayed there for a few weeks and I was troubled by terrible nightmares. Every night, I would wake up screaming. My parents tried to calm me down and asked me what was wrong. All I could tell them was that there was a man coming to get me. I can still remember the cause of my terror. Every night, I saw a shadowy figure emerge from behind the curtains in the corner of the room. He was a pitch black man. All I could make out was his silhouette. He was tall and he was hairy. I would watch in horror as he came crawling towards me with a sickening slowness. He came up to me and he whispered something in my ear. And just as I was about to scream, he would place a finger against his lips and whisper, "Shush, shush, shush." He tortured me every night to the point where I dreaded going to sleep. As time went on, he began to appear not only at night, but also during the day. One evening, we were all watching TV in the living room, and at some point, I happened to glance to my left. The curtain slowly drew back and I saw the man standing there, staring silently at me. He raised his hand, put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shush, shush, shush." I let out a horrified scream and immediately told my mother what I had seen. She got up and went over to the curtains, pulling them back and forth, showing me that there was nothing there. But of course, by then, he had already disappeared. When the holiday was over, we went back to our apartment in the city and the nightmares stopped. After that, my grandmother would always come visit us. So we never went to her cottage on a vacation again. As time went on, I stopped thinking about the man and eventually forgot about him altogether. One summer, when I was 13 years old and my little brother was 5 years old, we went to stay with my grandmother again. My parents were in the kitchen, having a cup of tea with my grandmother. They asked me to get my little brother ready for bed. When I was preparing a mattress on the floor for both of us to sleep on, my little brother was sitting on one of the beds. I noticed that he was being usually quiet. When I looked up, I saw that he was staring at something. "What's wrong?" I asked. Then suddenly he jerked his head around and looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. He looked at me, pointing at the curtains. The shush-shush man is standing there. Needless to say, my brother and I spent the night sleeping in the kitchen, and we never went to visit my grandmother's cottage again.